You've been an illustrious leader. I've been observing you, seeing you progress, have heard you speak in several locations, from manufacturing to telecom to services. And now you're doing so much transformatory work in NHRD. So it's my privilege and honor to host you today in this session called Insightful Leadership Series. And I do hope to learn a lot during this session.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Getting back to the space that you've been for the last 3 decades plus, and an absolutely brilliant career journey that you have had, there must be certain changes that you would have observed in this profession over the years. And what are 3 conspicuous changes that you feel have evolved over time? And what makes you reflect today on those 3 conspicuous shifts that we should know?
Wow, that's a very profound question. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it just takes my mind back. I mean, if I look at, I think there are lots of changes that I've seen. And partly it is changes, I think I can look at those changes across because of 2 dimensions. One, I think changes in the nature of business, in the nature of HR, how HR has evolved over time. But also changes as I've seen when I've moved from industry to industry. And I think some industries have given a very different spin to some of these things. So let me think about it, and let me try and see some of the changes that comes to my mind. I think when I joined Levers, which is like, 86, Levers was a company which was, very run, in a phenomenal way, very lean. There were personal managers at factories. There was one regional personal manager managing that region. There was one management development manager. When I joined, it was Tarun Sheth, who was a phenomenal figure there. One recruitment manager, one training manager, and that's about it. Yeah, and one compensation manager. So recruitment, training, compensation, one head of management development, and that was it. And that's how they managed the whole company. And I think as the business grew and as things evolved, I think the first big change that I think I could see within the whole HR around, in the around 97, 98, around that time, is when we started this whole concept of business partner. Yeah, I think Levers at that time earlier was a strong company with just main, the detergents business. Now we have detergents, we have personal products, we have chemicals, we have beverages, we have foods. And therefore, to manage all of these, I think 97, 98 onwards, we started moving to this whole business partnering thing. And I think that was the first big step, a change that I could see, the whole concept of partnering with a business, the whole concept of an HR person working with a business board, sitting with them, talking about the business. And I think that was, I don't know what other companies did, but for us in Levers, when we were doing very functional roles, was a big change. Yeah, and I think that really set the kind of a tone of a lot more close work with the business, and and that's how that was a big change in the way we looked at it. And the role of those HR people, we were among the first people in that role because we had to create that role, in terms of. The concept those days was called management development, but you're now doing management development for a business, but also you're taking a broader role for the business slowly. So I think that was one big shift, and that was a phenomenal kind of a thing. I think the other shift is basically as we moved, and again, this is again a journey within Levers, is as around the same time, I think there is this whole shift in terms of how we approached performance management and development. Yeah, I think in the past we used to have in Levers a very nice, what we call rating system. Forms filled up, forms done. You will be given a rating, and then you're supposed to, and you are supposed to write a paragraph there. Then it'll go to the head office. They'll see if it's all okay. It'll come back, and then you're supposed to read it out and then get the person sign that he agrees with it. That's how it was. But then we moved to performance. Those days we call it a performance development plan. I think that was another big shift because that really changed because this performance development plan had big changes. Number one, the change was there's no rating. You got to have three goals. You got to look at your development goals. You got to fill up this, and you got to have a conversation. And all the company did was they identified who were what we call as high potentials or high performers and just give them a higher rating, therefore that's how it was. So it was a rating in a way at the back. It was really basically who are your high potentials and high sustained high performers and people you'd like to look in the future. And that's how it was. So that was the second big change because that changed the way we work within HR. It changed the way I think the conversation that HR needed to have with people. So therefore, that was the other big change. I think the third big change is, I mean, there will be many others because I think, then I went on to work in Singapore and, there was lots more global thing and mergers. But the third big change happened when I moved to Airtel. And I think that was again, I think it's also a shift, which is probably because of the industry, but probably also because I think the whole, the change in the way we looked at HR and things. I think for the first time, the whole word of engagement became important. In all those 20 years in Levers, we never spoke engagement. It was like, that was given, things were working, there was not much of an attrition, and there was no engagement as a concept. But that was 20 years in Levers. And then when I come to Airtel and then we look at this, the large number of people, large number of frontline. There's also some attrition there. Those days, about 20% attrition. Then the whole concept of engagement started. And I think in Levers towards, we never did engagement surveys, but towards the end, we used to do once in 2 years. It was like a big survey, did pen and paper survey once in 2 years, and we used to kind of, take 6 months to really cascade it and do a lot of broad things that are there. But now it's like, how do you do this? And therefore, this was a thing. And it had its strengths because it made HR much more work with the business on day-to-day kind of a thing. But it also had its negatives because the focus was a lot more on engagement rather than some of the larger issues. So therefore, that was the other shift. I think some companies and some people did it better in terms of matching both the activity of engagement versus the larger kind of whole, the whole kind of canvas of keeping the engagement down. So that's another big change. There are many others. I can go on and on, but I think one last one I want to just talk about is this whole change in talent management, or leadership development. And that's, I think, something you're keen on. And I think, and again, this is through my journeys and almost 20 years in Levers has had a great role in shaping some of my thinking there. But I think the whole idea of those days was a strong focus on, identifying who are your top 20%, your high potentials, and how do you really, work on a career plan? How do you really articulate? A little bit at that the thinking being here's a company which has to provide the opportunities to key people, and we have to do the development. We'll have to send you overseas. We'll have to create this. So it was a little bit about much more planned way of developing people. I think that's changed. I think that's another big change. I mean, from those days to now, and many companies, for various reasons, this planned way of development has come down a bit. It's still there in some companies in some ways, but the development has become more democratized. It's become much more saying, okay, how do I provide the platforms for people to grow? And I think you can see that much more in an industry like IT, where I think the scale is huge. And this thing about identifying people is not going to work, at the level. You got to really ensure there are platforms, you got to ensure there are opportunities, and then people do. So therefore, that's been the other shift. I think this concept of whether you need a high potential or not, that's also gone through a change because those days, very clear reasons and how you can develop high potential. But now I think there's still debate. Some companies are still wondering, should I have it or not have it? And how do I do it? So this whole concept of leadership development from a much more focused, kind of targeted, planned approach has moved. to an approach which is a little bit more open, more platform, more kind of a thing. Though there needs to be some elements there, but I think that's the other big change in HR. So yes, I mean these are a few. There are many more that I can think of, but yes, it's been a great journey going through many of these changes and through each of these industries. So that's yeah.
That's deep learning for sure in terms of the spaces and the evolution of this function that you have seen over the last 3 decades. So, from something like a planned intervention to democracy that you're observing in leadership development in the world of today. So, fast forward to the digitalized world of today, and there is so much of talk going around emotional intelligence in leaders. It's pivotal. While I do realize, even 10 years back, there were leaders who displayed emotional intelligence brilliantly. Um, but today, the conversation or the focus of is, in fact, it's getting embedded in leadership development in many organizations. So, why, in your perspective, is this becoming so important in the world of today, Krish?
I think, see, in the past, there were the good leaders always had to be emotionally intelligent, yeah, and I think that was always there. Well, I think in the past, I think the choices available to people were limited, and I think people, if you look at two parts to it, the coping part, I think people coped with it in some ways, and therefore a lot of that coping was about how do I kind of build that resilience and move on? I think that's changed. I think people are now more expressive. People are lots more of multi-generational kind of people are there, much more diverse kind of people are working in the organizations. And there's a lot of change. The speed of change is also huge. And there is also a thing about, in terms of the average tenure of leaders with a team that's also kind of coming down, and therefore when you built a long history with a team, with built a long history with a company, there is some there is a legacy that kind of comes, but when that's not there, then you got to also work on it. So I think all this put together really creates a lot more focus on how do you really use this much more. Yeah, the time for you to get to a new team, get them up going, and get them at peak performance is much shorter now. Yeah, you don't have the luxuries of the past. You got to do it much more faster. You also have team members who could leave, and therefore they're also, from what it was in the past. Now I think you need to also ensure that you are, you're listening much more to them. And number three, I think there are various other options for people. Yeah. And there's also at the same time, the amount of change that each team goes through is increased. So therefore, unless you're able to manage these emotions and manage those changes, you won't be able to do it. In the past, when things were not changing as much, I mean, you could do it leisurely and, things could happen. But now I think it's become even more important. So yes, if you ask me why emotional intelligence and need for leaders have become important, it's these reasons. I think the shorter runway for leaders to make an impact, the options that people have, as long as if they feel they're not really being heard, they could leave or they won't be engaged. The amount of change that's happening and how the team has to really cope with each of these. So all these have come together, and I think the leaders now have to become much better at this, much better at understanding this part and trying to I think use that. So that's how it's become more
Beautiful. So I hear you say that there is you need to be an emotionally agile leader, more because of the paradigm of choices that people have in the world of today. Either working with a leader or working with an organization or working with teams as well. So this leads me to your research paper, which talks about, emotional capability in organizational transformation and the brilliant concept of collective emotions. And when I read that, it was such a beautiful insight, because we always have focused on individual emotions and individual emotions being displayed at the workplace. And this is quite a different aspect that thinks of a very holistic organization through collective emotions. So, what would you like to talk about that?
Okay. You must be one of the few people who have read that paper. So, no, I think when you're really talking of emotions, and I think the role of emotions becoming more important, I think the idea was, where is it, how can you apply it? Yeah. And I think the concept then really came because there is so much change or strategic change or transformation that's happening in every organization a lot more. And if you look at how we've been managing change, it's always been a very traditional, a cognitive process model. Yeah, I think everybody used to go back to that G model of change or whatever, saying these are the things, these are the 7 steps. Then you had John Cotter and others. So managing change became saying these are the 6 steps you got to do to manage change. And while I'm not discounting that, but that's a very programmatic way of managing change. And if you look at if you step back and say, why do you need all of this? And what are the elements of change needed? I think the key thing that really comes is at the heart of all of that is the emotions of people. Yeah. If you can get the right emotions in people at that time, then I think you can manage that change even better. So I think if you put everything aside and say, okay, I am going from A to B, this is the change I need. What are the kind of emotions I need during this change? If you can think about it, then comes this concept of this collective emotions. Yeah. And I think, and maybe I may take a step back to talk a little bit about emotions. And I think people confuse emotions with moods, etc. Yeah. Emotions are normally quite discrete. And I think if there is, for example, you see an event, and I think you get an appraisal and you don't get a great rating. That's a clear event, and therefore your emotions are down. Moods are a little bit much more longer term. Yeah. Moods are a lot to do with your psychological traits, but they are much more longer term. Yeah, but emotions are quite discrete; they're linked to events, etc., and they're more intense. Yeah, moods could not be, but emotions could be much more intense. And a series of these emotions really would impact people. Yeah, and I think now these emotions are also quite. If you look at emotions by nature, they are quite contagious. Yeah, and there's this very nice term that has been coined called emotional contagion. That means, which says that emotions are very contagious in a team. As soon as you get into a team, if somebody's really got positive emotions, you can quickly see that. And that's why it's great to start team meetings by sharing that positivity and creating that, because that really spreads around people first. So therefore emotions are contagious, and therefore with that's how, if there is a certain emotion seen by experienced by a group of people, that I would call as a collective emotion. Now, for example, take a team, a unit which is or a business unit which is not doing well. I think the unit has had a bad year, it's not doing well, etc. So what would be the collective emotions of people? They would be disappointed, they would be frustrated. That would be the collective, because that's what they all feel. Now, as a leader, you come there and say, okay, I want to transform this. And how do you do it? I think you've got to then say, I want to really look at what emotions are there in that team and how do I use it, what kind of emotions I need for them to have to really move on. And that's where the research and other things come in. Yeah. And I think while you're starting from somewhere, you got to say, okay, what kind of emotions are needed for this team to really be charged and to drive things? And there you say, no, I think I need emotions of optimism in the team. I need to see emotions of much more pride in the team. So that's what you need them to feel. And they are now here where they are a little bit frustrated, a bit disappointed. So how do you move there? And I think that's all. So if you can really articulate the emotions that you need in the team, which is needed for your business, then you can really make those changes. Now, and that's simple idea. So therefore, while all this change management is there, the key thing is what are the emotions that are needed for you to make at that part of your transformation cycle. And then you decide and say, okay, how do I build those emotions? And therefore, if you want to build optimism, then you got to talk about it. You got to set up events around it. You got to give them the vision of the future, make them feel the thing. And then once they feel that confidence and optimism, then I think it'll pick on. So that's all I wanted to say. And I think it is just managing any change or transformation. I think in summary, all one would have to say is what kind of emotions are needed for that part of the transformation to be successful, for the whole team to have. Yeah, that's how the group emotions come in. And to do that, then you really think of what are the kind of activities and events you need to do. And every event or activity you do, think about what emotions it will create. And once you do it, you'll be able to manage your transformation. So that's the basic idea.
Those were really powerful insights in terms of delving deeper into the psyche of people to lead organizations, and an absolutely rare perspective in all the conversations that I've had. So thank you for that, Krish. And obviously, you spoke about collective emotions that are required to bring transformation in organizations. When we think of leaders, not many leaders perhaps are even aware that their emotions are coming into the foray when they enter a room, or they are not probably cognizant that those emotions are becoming evident while they lead a team. So, what do you think are the implications of such leaders who are not aware that this could be a disruptive moment for the entire team, just because the leader is not aware of what is being processed by himself or herself as an emotion?
I think that's the classical, point of awareness, that every leader needs to have. I think you've got to ensure that they know about it. See, when you look at it, when you look at any leader, as I said, there is this one thing about how does he transform this group. That's where the group emotions come in. But he also needs to know that his emotions impact that group, and what he kind of uh, uh, creates his behavior, is an event. Every interaction with him is an event for them, and that creates certain emotions. And therefore, if you say, okay, look at each of your interaction as an event and see what kind of emotions that the person is going with and what kind of emotions do you want them to go with, that really makes them think. Yeah. And I think you got to make them experience that. You got to make them feel, and I think create that sense of empathy on emotions. Most people have it, and I think as they grow, they learn it and do it. But those who don't have it, they need to experience this. And I think the best way to do that is, in any leadership development, let them experience it themselves. Let them go through those, process those emotions that they themselves feel and how they felt on certain occasions. And I think a little bit of role playing in this and building that skill about of empathy, of compassion, will help them really understand that. I think they all get it in their mind, but I think sometimes, they are too much caught in certain blind spots. So I think one is the mental part, the cognitively telling them about what it is and how it can be used. But the part that is tougher is to really make them experience it, the kind of a feeling part. And I think that's where you got to, giving them role plays, giving them experiences where they really see it, process it, and then say, okay, I think every leader, and I think Daniel Goleman puts the four quadrant of emotional capability. So therefore, this awareness of emotions of self and others, and regulation of emotions of self and others. I think those are the four key things. So there's awareness, and I think it's about looking at every event. And if this concept I have found is very, very useful, saying, listen, every interaction is an event, and every event creates some emotions. So look at what emotions would this have created. Be put yourself in their shoes, experience it, and therefore you know what kind of emotion. So I think that kind of putting it much more starkly and letting them experience. I think you probably be able to build that skill of empathizing and understanding emotions.
Absolutely beautiful. So you touched upon the micro elements or micro experiences that a leader has to constantly create when he is interacting, or even when he is becoming visible to teams, because each of that is captured as experiences or moments in the person who receives it. And again, that is a very different insight altogether. So, Krish, one of the observations is that you have always been with organizations with a conscience. You've seen organizations that are really caring, very people centric, very human centric. And tell us more about why those organizations are different in your mind, be it Unilever, be it Airtel, be it Infi. What is special, and what has been your role in making these organizations special?
Well, I don't think there's much of role that I had played. I think it's how those organizations are built. I think it is. I mean, if you look at it, what creates these kind of things? Firstly, it is the values on which those organizations are built on. If you take in fields, those values of sea life, which is very strongly embedded by the founders, over years. If you take levers, again, there are very strong values that have been created. Uh, so therefore, that's number one. Number two, it's the leaders themselves, the leaders at that time. I think every leader is a embodiment of values, and every leader, by example, creates that culture. I think in levers, we've had some phenomenal people who really believed in it, and kind of, they may have different styles. Each one is different. It's not that everybody is a very affiliative, listening kind of a person. Maybe not, but I think in the end, they all vary in styles, but they would have those strong values. And at the end of it, when the rubber meets the road, they would take those kind of decisions which are much more longer term in the company's interests and people's interests. Similarly, if you look at so therefore, it's about the leaders, it's about the values, the founders, or the the companies work with, and it's about uh, it's at the end of it, it's about the simple processes that have been built. Yeah, and I think all these have made these companies be phenomenal in terms of working with people, etc. So therefore, uh, though I cannot claim much credit to many of these things, but yes, and each one and every leader, their role as a leader can play a role in terms of creating the environment within their teams, being a role model of values and those conscience, and ensuring that if the processes are there, those processes for people are respected, and ensure that the voice of the people where needed is heard. So those are some of the things that we could do as leaders.
While I accept that organizational values and role modeling leaders are very important, I must tell you this incident because of which I'm talking to you today, and I don't even know if you remember that. So we bumped into each other at an airport, in fact inside the aircraft. And the first question I asked you was, "Are you Krish Shankar?" Because I couldn't believe I was meeting you. And you said, "Yes, I am." And both of us were traveling to Ahmedabad, and then it was just a fleeting moment when we got off the plane and I said bye bye. But I think the warmth with which you said yes I am, and the warmth with which that bye was done, I think that made me contemplate on the simplicity of the human you were behind the large title and the role you were playing. And precisely the reason why I'm talking to you, Krish, today. I don't know much about you, but I think those micro moments that you leave behind in people, whether you know or don't know, makes a huge difference. So when you say, "I don't know whether I've played a role," I would say you definitely have played a role. If it has impacted a person who doesn't know you, I'm sure people within the organization have many such experiences. So thanks for being a very role modeling leader there.
My God. So there are two things that are there, that I've heard. One, I think, is a lot to do with being in XLRI, and there was Father McGrath, who used to be our, director those days. and some of the things that he taught. And then it's all about valuing people, and the small thing he said, you take a rickshaw and go, have you asked his name? Do you know who the person is? So I think that really stuck with me. So that's something that I've always lived with. The other one is a common thing that you hear, people, the common story that goes around in all this WhatsApp, in the sense that it is, there are, at the end, I think it's people call you for various things because of your position. And once you're out of the position, nobody would value you. But I think it's about, in the end, it's the individual that matters. So therefore, I would always, know that, listen, the positions don't matter at all. In the end, it is the people and the individual that matters. So I think these are the realities one has to live with.
Beautifully summarized in terms of leading without titles. That's what comes to my mind. So thank you so much for that. And so, in the changing landscape of HR and talent in the world of today, you touched upon this fact that, succession or talent planning has evolved, has undergone a sea change perhaps. And on the other end of the spectrum, we see a dilution of those processes in terms of adoption. Or when we need a new leader, we always go out to find the new leader while we do enough succession and enough talent planning within the system. So, why do you think this happens in organizations?
There's always a case for going out for a new leader. Yeah. I think we should not blame the whole talent succession planning for that, because there are various things. And I think what really comes to my mind is this very nice kind of a framework that that Boris Groysberg of Harvard, he's written this book about high flyers or something. I forget the name. But he's done a research about what really makes people successful, and and his research came up with, while we have these competencies, there are broadly 5 things that make leaders very successful. Number one is your functional skills. You got to know what it is. Number two, your leadership competency. So these two we know already. Number three, he said, is internal networks, because that's very important. And some roles need it much more, and some roles less so. Number four is external networks. And here again, there are some roles where external networks are there, like investment bankers. External networks are a big, big, big kind of thing there. And the last one is somebody who is having done the kind of role needed in that job in the next few years. That's very important. For example, if in this company, the next 6 months, next key thing is needed for somebody is to really, transform. You got to say, have the people done that before? Somebody who has done that transformation is needed to do it. If you've not done that before, you won't be able to do it. If you've all been sweating assets and if you've all been controlling costs, etc., and suddenly the kind of agenda is for a big transformation, they may not be able to. They may do all kinds of leadership development, but they're not yet ready. So you got to keep all this in mind. Yeah. And therefore, leaders are also very much for what is needed in that job at that particular time. Yeah. And I don't think we should put it broad brush. Yeah. For example, I may need a CEO. I'm looking at those Unilever days. They may need a CEO for China. And at that time, you may need a very particular person. You may say, listen, this is a time for huge growth. I need somebody who's much more aggressive. We've got somebody who's got sales knowledge because we've got to set up a sales thing. 5 years down the road, you may need a different type of a person. You may say, now I don't need that. I need a person who's going to really build local talent and something. So I think the key job to do of a leader also changes. And that's another one that you got to keep in mind as you look for roles in key positions. So therefore, why does leadership development doesn't do it? So it could be for these reasons. I think you've got to, while it'll meet all the situations, sometimes it may be very different. It may not have the right person. Sometimes if you want big transformation, you may need to get somebody from outside to really create that environment for change, and therefore it's always good to have, and I would say every company, 20 to 25% getting fresh blood in different things always helps. And in this world where there's lots more change, that's that's also quite good. So I think it's I mean traditional companies. I mean if you look at a Unilever, those things which were all self-grown, have all moved out and said no, I need some people from outside, and they started hiring. In the mid 2000s. So therefore they've also moved, and now the last CEO of Unilever came from outside, and the current CEO has been grown inside. So I think that really creates a new momentum, and you can do that. So, having said that, I think leadership development really is to provide the right opportunity so that you have the successors ready. And to do that, not only do they need those leadership skills and the functional, but they need to go through those experiences. I think that's very important. I think that's sometimes difficult and sometimes missing when we're really looking at who do you want to put as a CEO, who do you want to put as in a big role, because you may have lots of people, but they may not have done that the right experiences there. So I think those are all needed.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very brilliantly summarized. And so the next question is, what is the future of talent, or how do you see the talent landscape shift given whatever we are going through now? Do you see shifts happening in the way we should be looking at talent completely?
Well, I think there would be many. What are the shifts? I think number one, talent also is changing in terms of their own attitude and mind, etc., etc. I think they're also not somebody who's saying, I want to join this company and work for 20 years. They're saying, I want to see for 3 years. If it works, I look for another 3 years. So the horizons have come down much shorter. So that's something that is there. They're also looking for areas where they want to find more meaningful, the need to do more meaningful and purposeful roles in aligned to what they want to do in their own personal goals is also increased. Yeah, so that's another thing that we got to keep in mind. And number three, I think there are so many opportunities for them to learn and skill and kind of shift careers or pivot. Therefore, that's also a third thing. So talent is also, it's not in the past like, you're going in a unidimensional thing. You could really move around. So that's the other thing that's changing. The fourth is, I think you see, huge diversity now, a lot more diverse talent across various spectrum, age or backgrounds, gender, nationality. So that diversity is increased, and that will increase even more. And the last part of change could be, as you look at a career, I think you now, and the talent that builds in a career, you now have to look at people who are of various personas. There may be people who come in as specialists for some time and then they do something else. So lots, in a way, gig workers. It's a kind of it's a term which is caught on, but really it's specialists who could say, listen, I'm here for a couple of years, I want to do something else. And therefore that could be there. There could be longer term people. There could be people who are trying to, so therefore there is variety that is coming up there. And therefore, so that's how talent is changing. And at the same time, the organization is also changing. An organization is also now kind of, what is a successful talent will change every 5 years, and what is your key talent or your high potential will also change every 5 years because of the context of the organization. I think, therefore, with all of this, we need to look at talent much more openly. We need to look at certain things that are important for talent to really be aligned to what you want to do. I think while there are roles for specialists in different things, you need talent who can learn a lot more, talent who are agile, and therefore you need to really provide those opportunities for that. So I think those will be some of the changes. I think with COVID, yes, you'll have people with lots more remote working. That'll also accelerate some of these changes, much more uh, gig kind of a thing, much more people trying to say, listen, I won't move, but I want my career. How do I do it? So that's going to be another one that will come up. So, and therefore, as organizations, we've got to be, it is again there's this whole thing of n equals one. That kind of really becomes a little more, that was a word we never kind of followed, but I think we got to start at least looking at your personas. And there'll be, in any talent, you'll have 5 or 6 different personas of talent. What is your value proposition for each of those? What is your value proposition for somebody who wants to be a specialist? What's your value proposition for those guys who want to learn and grow? So therefore, you got to look at your talent and say, okay, what are the different personas I have? What could be the different value propositions? How do I build it all together? And therefore creating this portfolio of different types of talent coming in is something that we have to do in HR.
I hear you say that we need to create an ecosystem where you understand the multi dimensional persona of people who work with you, where the tenure may be short, but they're looking for opportunities, and still you're able to kind of engage them in the context of today. As an HR function, Krish, what are your thoughts about skills required for HR teams today? And one of the most under commented or not spoken about concept is that of executive presence. While we see the fraternity build a lot in the functional skills, somewhere executive presence needs to be focused on much more in the generation of today. So do you believe that is correct, and what are your thoughts on that?
See, I think the executive presence is, you got to probably read a little bit deeper into it. Yeah. I think executive presence, people are talking about somebody who communicates well, who kind of is able to influence and kind of hold his own, and therefore has that charisma, or that, in a way, a personality. So that's what is broadly the concept of executive presence that is there. But I think while that is, some of it is needed, you can't, if you don't have that presence, and to make an impact, you won't be able to do it. But that executive presence makes much more importance where there are a lot of decisions where first impressions are more important. Yeah, where you're working in sales and this kind of thing, that executive presence is much more critical because you've got a short time span to make that impact. Yeah. I would say in HR it is important, but you got to read into a layer below that, because HR people are working much more longer term, and I think this flash in the pan initial charisma is not going to really, if that's the only thing you have, it's not going to work. What is needed is this. I think what is the layer behind it? Number one is credibility. You got to build credibility. And that credibility will come from your actions, from what you think and how you. Number two, it's about influencing. It's about communicating and influencing. And I think that's where we've got to, build those skills. So, and number three, it's about having a point of view. Yeah. And I think this is about saying, listen, this is what I think we should do, and kind of building a kind of, what do you call, uh, being empowered to make that point of view. And that sometimes in HR, people tend to do less of that. And I think we tend to kind of, do lots more operational stuff. But I think this is important to really have a clear point of view. I think those three really build what is needed to make an impact. Yeah. So I would say build trust and credibility. That will come through a lot through your actions, a lot through how you kind of, follow up, and, and the results that people see. Number two is all about influencing and communication. That's very important in everything. How do you build that influence? How do you, talk to your peers? How do you really talk to the leaders? And number three is about having a strong point of view, because that point of view, or having that edge in your thinking, really creates a respect, because you're standing for something, and therefore you go. That's third one that really will help. So I think if you were to ask, executive presence is important. Yeah. But I think you got to read what is below that. And what is below that is these three: building trust, building influencing and communication, and having a strong, clear point of view, or clarity of your viewpoint. I think those three things, if you build, that will really be the executive presence you need to make things work for you.
What has been one of your most difficult task or situation where you've had to use your point of view very powerfully? Can you recall any or many?
There have been many. Many of have not been successful. So therefore, it doesn't mean that every time one will be successful. But I think, yes, we've been through various cases where I can remember a case where we were planning about one reorganization, and there was a point of view. There was a case where we were talking about a new way of. So therefore, each one I had a point of view, and sometimes I had to also change that based on the view. But it's important that you build a point of view based on some facts and some kind of a thing, and be articulate and be passionate about it. And I think that's and sometimes it may not always work. Sometimes you'll have to change it because of the organization's needs. You may change it because there are other points that are important. But then that's important for you to understand and say, okay, I understand, and this is what we can do. So yes, been instances where I've tried, but yeah, it's not always been that successful.
That's core honesty. Thank you for that. Finally, Krish, when you wake up every morning, what is that one thing that makes Krish happy?
See, I think firstly, what I can say is that there's lots to be thankful about. Yeah, I think that's about it, in the sense that here there are so many things that that are going for you. I think that's itself is something that's in a way kind of a God's gift in a way. So therefore you got to be should have that gratitude that there's so many things there. I think it's all about saying, okay, what else can you do to make an impact? An impact on people, impact on organizations, an impact on whatever it is, impact on teams. But most of all, it's impact on people. Impact on organization you may have, may not. And that's fine. But it is the impact on people. It's the impact on what you can do within. That's important. And I think if in the end of the day you feel that yes, you've been able to kind of um, motivate a few people, or you want to kind of get some people kind of change their thinking or do something different or kind of work with them. I think that really helps. So yes, I think what makes me happy is firstly, I mean, really gratitude for lots of things, and number two is the kind of opportunity to make an impact on people, impact on business team, the little way one can.
That is such a true transformational journey that you are doing in the role that you are performing. That's so, so important. And so we touched upon agility of leadership, we touched upon the need for change, we touched upon the talent landscape. There was a deeper conversation around executive presence and the point of view, that is the thought process that goes behind the overall executive presence that most of us seem to be thinking. You spoke about several different organizations and the learning and the shifts that the world has evolved. Krish, I think this has been an absolutely insightful leadership conversation for today. And again, thank you so much for remaining the humble leader that you are, continuing to inspire several globally. And thank you for making time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I think you've been very passionate about this. So wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Krish. Look forward to connecting with you again. Bye bye.
All right. Bye.